This conference will now be recorded.
Awesome. So thank you again for joining us today. The Tacoma-Pierce County Affordable Housing Consortium is a nonprofit membership-based agency. I am the executive director, Amanda DeShazo. We provide public education and advocacy for the expansion of affordable housing in Pierce County. We do this by educating the public on the need for affordable housing, by hosting webinars like this, meetings, collecting data to share with the public. We also advocate at the state and local level for policies and funding that will support the creation of more affordable housing throughout Tacoma and Pierce County. Our consortium has about 60 members from affordable housing developers, financiers, construction companies, architects, consultants, and individual advocates who are all dedicated to advancing affordable housing in Pierce County. So if you found this event through Facebook or Eventbrite and would like to learn more about our organization or becoming a member, you can find us at affordablehousingconsortium.org. So today we're doing our first policy talk. I said earlier, if you've been to our Lunch and Learn series, it's a bit similar, but instead of doing the presentation type, we're doing more of a conversation. I want you guys to have the opportunity to also ask questions and engage with Ava. So I ask that you guys put your questions in the chat if possible. But if we get some time, maybe we'll just open it up because I have given you guys the ability to share your screen and chat. So I have some questions for Ava that she's already got, but I'm just hoping that we have a good dialogue about the policy we're here to talk about. So today joining us is Ava Pittman. And am I saying your name right, Ava?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So Ava Pittman, she is Planning and Policy Analyst at the Tacoma Housing Authority, who is also a member of ours. Thank you so much. So she's going to be answering questions today about the proposed changes to Tacoma Housing Authority's criminal background screenings. So Ava, why don't you tell us a little bit about THA and then expand on your role and what you do there?
Yeah, so THA, we're a public housing authority, which means that we subsidize housing by either one, providing vouchers to families so that they can rent a unit in the private market, and that voucher then pays a portion of the rent. And then we also own and manage a number of our own properties in which we rent out the units, and the rent is then dependent on the family's income. And so those are the two primary ways that we provide affordable housing to low-income families and individuals in Tacoma. We are a moving to work agency, which means HUD grants us some flexibility around their normal regulations and program rules so that we can design different types of programs to serve low-income families in Tacoma. So like we have our chat program, which offers vouchers to homeless students enrolled at TCC, and through that we've been able to subsidize like larger properties and enter in those types of agreements. So we get to do some fun things sometimes. But what we're doing right now is we are taking a look at our criminal screening policies. And these criminal screening policies are a component of a list of criteria that we have to look at to determine if someone, like an applicant coming off our wait list, or if someone's wanting to join a family already receiving assistance from us, is eligible to receive that assistance. And so one of the criteria is criminal history. And part of that is that we are required to by HUD, because we have to look for certain things in which HUD prohibits admission for, which is, the first is if anyone is subject to a lifetime registration for a sex offense, that is a lifetime denial. Basically, we can't, there's no flexibility around that. Also, if anyone has ever produced meth in federally subsidized housing, that is also something we must deny for. And then there's also if anyone whose past history demonstrates a current or pattern of use of alcohol or drugs that would threaten the life or threaten the health and safety and enjoyment of the other residents or neighbors. If there's any indication of that, then that's another thing that HUD requires public housing authorities to deny for. In that, though, public housing authorities define what that looks like and what that means. And also there is the flexibility to then say if someone can demonstrate that they've either are participating in or have completed a supervised rehab program, then that is a way to kind of bypass that denial and be approved for housing, giving all other requirements are met.
Can I ask you a question about that really quick?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what would that look like for THA? Like, how would you determine if somebody has a pattern of use?
Right now, the policy defines that as any use within the last 12 months. In practice, I'm not 100% clear how that looks, just because how do you really make that determination? So given that I don't do the leasing work, I don't know exactly how that's looked at, but generally, since we have a look back period of 5 years, which means that the day that we are looking at someone's application, we're going from that day and looking back 5 years to see, the presence of criminal history. And so, if there's going to be a drug or alcohol conviction on that record within that 5 years, that I guess kind of falls under that umbrella to some extent. But other than that,
Yeah, it seems like it would be hard to determine.
Yeah, there's no drug or alcohol testing or anything like that.
Yeah. So really quickly, before we kind of get into the policy though, I wanted you to kind of tell us a little bit about your role there. Because this is the first time we're actually like meeting. So we've only emailed and I'm interested in your position and how long you've been there and like what you've been doing on this.
Yeah, so I've been at THA for just over 5 years. I've been in this role for maybe almost 3 or 2. It's hard, the way time flies. But in this role, I am the lead on our MTW work. So like I mentioned before, MTW is a special designation from HUD that allows us to try out new ideas and programs or adjust rules so that we can design our policies and programs to fit the people that we're serving. And so part of that also means, we're doing a report every year to let the public and HUD know the outcomes of what's of how we've used our moving to work flexibility. So things that we're achieving by doing things a little bit differently. And then we also, since these flexibilities, we have to ask for permission first. And so every year we also, if we have new ideas, we present those to HUD every year for their approval as well. And so that's a big chunk of my work. I also do a lot of our policy work. So whenever, like for instance, there's a thought to change a policy, revise a policy, or evaluate one, I'll kind of take the lead on that. So doing the research, evaluation, community consultation, and forming a recommendation.
Okay, so I have 2 questions for you. You did the report, right? So there was like a huge report that was put out with this. Was that your work?
Yeah.
Oh, you did amazing. Yeah, very, very long. If you guys joined through the Eventbrite, I put the link in there so you guys can pull up the report. It's also on THA's website. Really, really interesting, and I think will also help, further down the road when people are also looking at these policies. So then my second question for you, just so I clearly understand, so were you guys given the opportunity to change this policy because you are a moving to work agency?
No, luckily this is something that all housing authorities have the flexibility to review and take a look at. So
good to know.
Yeah, and in this, and so in this work, it was nice to learn that a lot of housing authorities have taken a look at their criminal screening policies and change them one way or the other. You know, there's still plenty that have outdated old policies on how they look at criminal history, but it's nice to know that other places are doing this similar work and at least making these types of considerations too.
Yeah, and I think right now it's such a pivotal time too with what's going on about racial equity. Like we know that it ties into criminal justice. So I think this is perfect timing for us to be having this conversation. And I'm glad that you guys are proposing the changes. So I want to get a little bit into the policy. Can you maybe just give us like a rundown of the basic principles or like the major points of the policy recommendations that you guys are making?
Yeah, so I guess the highlight is that one, for our voucher holders, for our voucher programs, the proposal is to not review for criminal history at all, except for what we are required to review for by HUD. Like I mentioned, the lifetime sex registration will be denied, and anyone who's manufactured meth in federally subsidized housing. And so some of those, those HUD mandated required denials, we can't and won't change. But outside of that, the proposal is to not deny anyone a voucher because they have criminal history. And so the basis for that really too is that these are folks going out into the private market to rent from a landlord. Landlords have their own criteria screening that they do. So if a landlord is willing to rent to somebody with a criminal history, why should we be the barrier, really? And so we can't control or what other landlords are doing, but at the very least, we can put vouchers in the hands of more people, and then let them find housing. So that's that's one of the highlights as far as the voucher side. On the property side, which is where you basically can look at THA as a landlord, where we own and manage properties. We have, I think, 7 buildings that are dedicated to seniors and adults with disabilities, and then I think 5 family housing. And so for that, the policy recommendation is to reduce our look back period. So right now, as I mentioned before, we will look at the last 5 years of someone's criminal history to look for any disqualifying events. And so the proposal is to reduce that look back period to 1 year. And then if someone does have a conviction within that 1 year period, rather than just denying them, we would then ask and require for them to come in for an individualized review, which is basically, you know, just a talk. You come in, meet with THA staff, and they're just there to learn a little bit more about you, about the circumstances, and then are able to make a determination as to whether or not to deny or admit based on criminal history. And we already do that in a way because every applicant who is denied for criminal history is entitled to what's called an informal review. And typically that is something that happens after someone has been denied, and it's something that they have to request. So this is really just taking that piece and moving it forward and prioritizing, getting to know, making case-by-case judgments before denial, because, you know, I understand that after hearing no so many times, you just get used to it and it's harder to push past that. So we want to put that opportunity first before denying someone for criminal history. And then I do see a question about the follow-up, if it will include any sort of standardized questions. I think that's part of what we'll be figuring out during this process, is what is important to be looking for, what are the things we need to consider, so that we know what those standard questions look like, or what these need to be posed during an individualized review to make, you know, non-biased and equal judgments on a case-by-case basis.
Okay. I hope that answered Casey's question. So I had a question. Sorry, I kind of was like off track thinking about what Casey was saying. If she was talking about the questions that are going to be asked of folks that have a criminal history, or if she was just talking about questions in general. Are you guys going to put out like a question sheet, like a Q&A, like typically like, you know, City of Tacoma would do for a public hearing on something, or if there's an issue? Because I know you guys are accepting comments right now, right? Comments and questions.
Yeah.
Do you anticipate putting out like any kind of document?
Yeah. So after the public comment period has ended, yeah, I'll take everything that we've collected, and then we will post like formal responses on our website.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, awesome. So then there's one more piece of your guys's proposal, and maybe you already addressed that, connecting someone to the client support and empowerment. So I'm a little bit interested about that. I know you said that, you know, if they have something on their history within the 1 year, they would talk to somebody and could potentially, you know, be housed based on that.
Yeah, so normally when someone's going through the application period, once they're admitted, there's an opportunity to provide a referral to our community service client support and empowerment department, CSE, that's what I'll call it going forward, to our CSE department, which offers case management services. And so typically this would be either offered because the applicant has indicated that they need support in some way, or I don't know how often this happens, but maybe that leasing specialist that's working with them maybe felt they could benefit. So what the recommendation or proposal is that for folks who have the conviction within the last year, they went through the individualized review process, and THA made the determination to approve them for tenancy, then at that point, there would be an automatic, the proposal is that there is an automatic referral to the CSE department. And at that point, CSE will contact that applicant to see if they're interested in case management services. So it's just almost just a more of an automatic link, but there's no, the recommendation is not to require participation.
So it's all voluntary. If they decide they want the services, it's there for them.
Yeah. And of course, that's part of, you know, what we're asking for feedback on is, should it be required? Should it not be required? Should it be required under certain circumstances? You know, what are others' thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm. So can I ask, like, what brought this about? Why is THA considering changing the policy?
I think a couple things just kind of came into place. I think one, historically, from what I understand, THA has hoped to find different ways to serve folks with criminal histories and justice-involved folks better, just because we know the resources aren't, you know, can be lacking, especially in terms of housing. And around 2016, there was, and I forget the group, but it was like a Spark report. It was a group that researches race and homelessness, that intersection. And they did a lot of face-to-face interviews with homeless folks in Pierce County. And some of the things that they heard throughout that process was that criminal history was a barrier. And I think at around that same time, the Vera Institute of Justice, they offer technical, they receive funding from, I think, HUD, to provide technical assistance to public housing authorities who either want to develop programs for justice-involved individuals and families, or revise their policies around criminal justice issues. And so we were able to link up with Vera at that same time to get their help to start this process. And so that was kind of all those things aligning at the same time for us. But it's something that's been on THA's plate and mind to consider, how can we do this?
Yeah, you guys are always typically forward thinking, which is really appreciated. So I have a couple questions that some of our members actually had asked. And I think, so let's talk about the look back period really quick. I know I sent this in the email, but one of the questions that we got from one of our members was asking, why is the look back period specific to the 3 felony convictions? So violent, drug-related, or threatening offenses, as opposed to just all felony convictions.
Well, one, HUD's regulations calls those specific categories out, but also it's, you know, we're not screening for criminal history just to see if it's there. You know, we are looking for any indication in someone's past history to give us an idea of whether, you know, they'll be a successful tenant. And so, you know, that question is really, you know, what is relevant then when making that determination? You know, is it relevant to look at whether or not someone stole something? I don't know. What are the types of behaviors that we want to buffer residents from? You know, violence, anything that's going to increase crime on the properties, and endanger people's health. So we don't want to deny folks simply because they have a criminal history. It's more about screening for behaviors or patterns of behaviors that will, you know, inform what they're going to be like as a neighbor almost. And so those are typically the most concerning.
And so just so we're clear, so they would be screened out. So anybody that had one of those 3 convictions, or all 3 of them per se, they just wouldn't be able to have an interview. Is that right?
No. It's just more, so say if we're only looking at felony convictions for violent, drug-related, or threatening offenses, if I have a felony offense for, I don't know, assault, then that's a conviction that's going to flag me for an individualized review.
Gotcha.
Versus a conviction for identity theft, if that's not meeting that criteria in the policy, then that's actually not something that's going to get someone denied.
Gotcha. So you're still giving them a chance, even though those are the 3 that are like flagged for you guys. It just gives them the opportunity to have an in-depth conversation about whether it's relevant to being a tenant at THA or not.
Right.
Awesome. And so then the other question was actually about like the time period. So, and maybe you found this in your research, why are you only doing a 1-year look back as opposed to 3 years or 5 years?
You know, really, there's no magic number. I think part of what drove the 1 year was that we really do want to reduce the barrier to housing. And part of that is also understanding that the first 6 months, the first year right out of incarceration is probably the most crucial time. It's when someone needs housing the most. And so at what point, you know, if someone can go a year without reoffending, 2 years without reoffending, you know, I don't know, it's one of those things that where we're letting our social justice mission drive that more than, you know, setting this high bar where we don't know if 3 or 5 years is a better indicator than 12. And so why keep a higher barrier if it's unnecessary? And really, we're hoping that this just provides the opportunity for folks to obtain housing when they need it, especially anyone who is exiting and then hoping to rejoin their family living in a THA property.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about your research. Assuming that nobody on the call here or on the webinar has been able to read it, it is very in-depth, and it's really good if you have the chance to look through it. Can you tell us a little bit about what you found, kind of what you did, if you've had those conversations with community groups yet, about maybe your process, you know, just give us the 411.
Yeah, so prior to making these recommendations, there was definitely a comprehensive literature review. So really looking at tons of studies, looking at recidivism, especially, and what impacts that. And so one of the key, some of the consistent things I found over and over and over is that one, income and housing are critical components to reducing recidivism.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, having positive social relationships. So your family, when you are connected with them, those are the three things that really seem to have a positive effect on someone on whether they're or not they're going to reoffend. And then also just seeing the link between homelessness and incarceration. So that ends up being a cycle. And so part of that, this policy approach is to be preventative, right? Like, let's get folks housed, or at least the opportunity to be housed before, things get too desperate, or before, so that we can address the need before someone else has to, in a negative way, I guess. And so that, just kind of using that as a baseline, it just seemed smart to reduce the look back period based on that information alone. And then another consistent finding, even though these studies mainly focused on populations with high needs, so typically those who might be chronically homeless, dealing with severe mental health issues, or like substance abuse disorders, or some combination of all those things, when higher folks with higher needs are placed in supportive housing, they're able to be successful. They're able to access the services that they need. They're able to become stabilized. And so if that's having a positive impact on those who have higher needs, then, for anybody else, housing alone is probably just enough to provide the stability that they need to also move forward with their lives, on top of the fact that with THA's housing, they have a direct connect to case management services as well through our departments. So
yeah,
kind of knowing, one, income, housing, and family affect recidivism positively, but also knowing that services help. We have all those things kind of get rolled into the situation right here. And then also looking at THA's internal data, I've looked at, the applications from the last 4 years. I've looked at some of our clients who've, either been evicted for criminal behavior or have been a nuisance in that way, and trying to look at who had a criminal history at admission. And it just really, criminal history doesn't predict those behaviors one way or the other.
Great.
And I was able to talk to other housing authorities that have 1-year look-back periods or shorter look-back periods. And it just, criminal history isn't the predictor, right? Like it's someone has offended in the past, but it doesn't really tell us whether or not, what kind of tenant there will be, or if they'll be successful. I mean, you need housing to be successful at anything. So at least, it's hard to even make that decision if someone isn't receiving the services and support that they need in the first place. It's unfair to then say that they're going to be a poor fit, when really someone just doesn't have what they need.
Right. And so ultimately, by screening people out, we're just discounting them even having the ability to be a good tenant in our housing, or in your housing.
And in the studies that looked at these permanent supportive housing models and different types of programs, in their analysis, when they're looking at who the successful tenants have been and what resulted in unsuccessful tenancy, criminal history did not play a role in predicting whether or not that would happen. So it just, when you start digging into the research, criminal history isn't the best predictor of whether or not someone's going to be a good tenant.
I wish we could just record that and then blast it through the radio, Such a bad connotation, but it's, if people did the research, then they would understand. But
Right.
but it's so easy to judge. So I have a question about the policy and so what this looks like. I guess I'm thinking because we know COVID is happening and a lot of people have been released from prison or jails early. From my understanding, I think the Urban League is doing a lot of work right now to make sure that the people that are coming out early are getting housed. So I'm thinking about in terms of turnaround time for your guys' policy, what does that look like for you? If the board, you take it to the board and they approve it, and then when does that go into effect if they approve it?
It's a little hard to say because I think part of it, it requires some internal training as far as, just if we're going to be adopting this policy, when we do roll it out, we want to make sure that our staff are fully trained on understanding a background screening. Not to say that folks don't already, but while we're rolling out this new policy, let's just go ahead and freshen things up, tighten things up. And so I would like to see THA do internal trainings with staff about, one, background screenings, different types of offenses, what they really mean, because what does it take for a felony offense for this assault versus a misdemeanor? What are those differences? What drives those things? And so it's important to know that. And then it's also just, I think staff, it would be beneficial for staff to receive training on how to conduct these reviews as well, what to be looking for, what to ask, how to do this in a way that is not going to be biased, discriminatory, or unequal, and be beneficial for the applicants and for THA. And so it'll take a little while after adoption, but we do want to implement this, as quickly as possible. But I know my perspective, I want to make sure we do it right too.
I think that's the most important thing too. And you will have a lot of training, I'm sure, to do around it. But it is exciting. Yeah. And I'm assuming that you have help from other housing authorities that have done similar.
Yeah, and so I've been reaching out to other community groups in Pierce County and just to see what resources are out there, who we should be talking to and about what, and who we should be engaging with so that we can adopt and implement this policy in a way that's really meaningful and valuable.
Yeah. So I have another question for you about, and maybe you don't have the answer to this one. It was kind of like just curious, but do you know, after or if this policy as it's proposed gets adopted, do you have an idea about how many people would be, helped through it? Or, I mean, I guess it's hard to say, but.
Yeah, I would say it's really hard to say because I think one, just the whole nature of public housing and the public housing wait list, people, it's a wait, sometimes you're waiting a year, 2, 3 years to even receive an offer of housing. And so we actually didn't have a lot of folks that had really recent convictions so far. And we also, I guess, don't deny a lot of folks due to criminal history either. And so as far as like how many more people will be able to access housing because of this policy, I don't know. I envision that this is going to be most beneficial for folks who want to live with their families living in a THA property. And when it comes to even guessing that, it's hard to say. I think people get used to hearing no's about criminal history and get used to assuming that anything government related or program related is going to be strict and deny. And so it's hard to know how many families are in need really of this type of policy.
Yeah, I'm not surprised, even though, so our agency doesn't technically provide housing, right? We're membership based. Our members provide the housing and we just do like the advocacy around it. But I get so many emails and phone calls that people are looking for housing that's specific for people who have a criminal history. Yeah. And it's like, for me, I don't think about it, obviously, because I haven't experienced that, but just to know that there's going to be another resource in the community that can help is actually going to be major. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's, it's not so much that we'll be providing, reentry housing, but it's just more the doors are wider open. So if you
Right.
have a criminal history, don't disqualify yourself. Apply,
Mm-hmm.
be open, and be open to the process. It's probably going to work out more often than not.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about, maybe what the impact of THA passing this policy could mean for the city of Tacoma.
Mhm.
Now, I don't know if you have an opinion on that or can even answer the question, but it was a couple years ago. I was working on the landlord-tenant policies with a group of stakeholders. THA was definitely at the table, along with the tenants themselves and a lot of for-profit private landlords. And this topic of criminal screening, having a look back period, all that stuff has been a pretty hot topic. And I'm just
Mhm.
wondering if, well, that's why I'm not sure if you could answer this question, but if you think that it might have some kind of positive impact on, landlord tenant policies within the city.
I think that's our hope. We hope that we can be an example. We hope that we can kind of at least start paving that way for the city to start considering looking at some type of ordinance or, being even almost an example so others can see what happens when you change your policy and kind of, go from there. I think the only little bit that I've heard from the city, because I did reach out and ask, what are their thoughts around this type of work? And it doesn't sound like it's something on the city's mind at this time, based on what I've heard. I can't say officially, but
Right.
our hope has been that we could at least be an example and serve as an advocate for future policy work around criminal screenings.
Yeah.
I would hope, the city would take notice and hopefully drive some change in that way, though.
Yeah, I could definitely say, like, I know you guys have produced research in the past that has been really helpful, especially like the Just Cause. So I'm not sure if, people who are on the webinar today are familiar with what's been happening at the state level, but there's been a huge push for Just Cause um, legislation to pass. And I know THA had done a huge study, which I'm sure is also on your guys' website, which
Mhm.
has helped to inform a lot of folks. I think it's like 90 pages and it's all different ordinances like across the country, compared to one another and what that means and best practices from those ordinance and the findings. So I have no doubt that the research that you've done, Ava, is going to actually help us in the city of Tacoma to maybe pass something similar at the city level,
Yeah.
which would be really helpful. When you were doing your research, did you look at all at Seattle's fair chance housing policy?
Yeah, and some of the research actually helped inform these recommendations, because I know they actually, when the ordinance was initially proposed, they did have a look back period, and it kind of got biased. I don't want to say at the last minute, but the final ordinance said, basically landlords can't screen for criminal history at all. So, and that was based on the fact that people need housing, upon exit. And so, yeah, I looked at their policy and kind of used it as a guide. I talked to one of the compliance folks in their human rights office or whatever office that came out of, and just to see how it's been faring over there. It seems to have been doing well, according to Seattle. They haven't been getting too much, like, I think there was initial pushback because it's hard to hear that there's more rules about what you can and can't do, but there hasn't been a negative effect on housing or what's available.
That's good to know too. I know at the state level, there has been an ordinance that I think it was introduced. I don't know if it was last year or the year before. Obviously, it hadn't passed, but I think they're doing some revision over the interim session, like right now, to get it revised and proposed maybe this upcoming year. If anybody's interested, I know the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance is working on that. I think Pioneer Human Services has had some kind of say in that as well. And the King County Bar Association, they've been working on it really well too. So that would be really exciting. I mean, it's always good to see something like this pass at the state level, but just having THA in the backyard that's going to be doing this work, I think gives City of Tacoma a platform to really amplify this.
Yeah, I know. I believe our executive director was planning on being involved in some of those talks, discussions, but I think around that same time they tabled the issue.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
At least by the time they probably revisit, this will be nice and polished.
Yeah, I think so. And I think hopefully you guys will have some good feedback for them. You can provide the research. So we have like 15 minutes left in our call/talk. I don't know if anybody that's in the meeting right now has any questions for Ava. I haven't seen any in the chat, but I want to give everybody the opportunity. And if you feel like sharing your screen, go for it. Otherwise, I mean, is there anything else that you wanted to share with us? Oh, look, there's a comment from Casey actually. So Casey asks, is there anything in particular you would really like people to provide feedback on?
There is a survey linked in the chat, which actually is a multiple choice survey that does solicit the feedback on each particular issue. That way we know where people stand on each different topic. Like, should we reduce the look back period? Should we do an individualized review? Should we look at all felony convictions or just felony convictions for drug-related violent or threatening offenses? Or should we look at felony and misdemeanors for all, or felony, you know, all those types of issues that we're trying to see where the public stands on is laid out in that survey. And I don't think it should take you too long, but I also would love to welcome anyone's experience and expertise as far as being a justice involved person or working with justice involved folks who are looking for housing, and how all that intersects, and you know, what should other things, are there things that THA is not considering based on what you've seen that we should be looking at or thinking about to help inform whatever the final recommendation is going to be. So one, we'd like feedback on the proposals as they are, and you can do that through email or through the Google survey that's linked in the chat and on our website. And then two, if there's anything that comes to your mind that you'd like to offer, and suggestions, advice, comments, questions, concerns, any of that.
Mm-hmm. Hi, Larry.
How you doing? Just sitting here. I apologize. I got in a little bit late today. I was trying to get linked in, but I love this conversation here. This is pretty much exactly what I work and do every day as a reentry navigator for DOC and over at Tacoma Community College. And we have the chat program over there, which we're trying to expand on the DOC component, but we also have the other for our homeless, at-risk homeless population. But many of the questions you ask here are many of the things that we have to address at TCC. But looking at the background, I think the background that's a tough one, because oftentimes on the background checks, my job is to look at that, but I have access being a reentry navigator for DOC, so I could look at that background. But as a former justice involved individual myself, I know the barriers that these individuals are going to be going through because I've had to do them myself, and I'm still subjected to those things 15, 20 years out. It never goes away. So the background checks, our biggest problem is we look at when I'm trying to place somebody, I look at the severity of the nature of the charge. Of course, people that have rape, pedophile, at risk to elderly and kids, those are a whole different approach right there. Other than that, I look at time and duration sometimes, you know, from date of conviction. What have you done since the date of conviction while you were incarcerated, and post-release? What have you done? What'd you do with your time? Did you work all the time? Did you complete all your programs? You know, look at those risk levels, because we don't want to send somebody that's going to be a risk to any placement, because that would really deter our population even more, which we're already marginalized already. So, you know, I agree with you. You know, you're doing some good work here and you're asking the good questions here. And I would like to share, you know, what I've been through with you, if you guys would like to have that conversation a little bit more and expand on this conversation. There's so much to it in a little bit of time, but I am available for this conversation here, and I would like to share my experiences with you, and you know what I face at my job with individuals that have misdemeanors or different levels of you know, just different types of felonies or misdemeanors. Misdemeanors, what I found is most property owners through our TCC program, our normal program, chat program, you know, the housing development management has been open, and they have accepted individuals that only had driving offenses, which are considered misdemeanors. Well, they did accept them, but they do not accept any of the higher level felonies. So we got to seek elsewhere. But you know, there's a lot of things to, a lot of pieces to this here. But like I says, I just wanted to drop in, let you guys know I'm listening, and I do have a lot probably to help you out with and expand on the conversation a little bit and see, you know, what we can do, because we're working all together, and we're working in collaboration also. So thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you. And I would love to, you know, follow up with you after this to schedule some time to talk. I would love that.
Yeah, and I see Jess Thompson is on. Well, I do work with Jess, and she has my contact information. She works with our chat program. She works with both of our programs, so she knows the work that we're doing over there and what you guys are doing. And I had spoke to her about this a little earlier. Hi there. I told her I would be getting in over here and attending this meeting so that I could see what kind of needs are what you guys need, what needs you guys need met. Thank you.
That's awesome. Thanks for your work, Larry. It sounds like maybe Jess can connect you with Ava.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome.
Yes, perfect.
Thank you so much. It's great to see you.
Well, it's just wonderful to hear this conversation, because we need this conversation more out in the community. So, you know, people hear what we're doing. A lot of times, you know, we're in these small little circles here, and the word doesn't get out that, hey, we're trying to change things out there for individuals. And my population needs to hear this, because this is what, you know, this does excite them, and this tells them, you know what, there is some light somewhere in this tunnel here. And sometimes, you know, when we make that available, you know, it can change their inner, and, you know, it can change them. So, you know, like I said, I'm working with a female right now that just got out last week. She's in a temporary placement, but if we can get our vouchers for women going by the winter, she will fall in line for that. And that would be awesome, just to see her receive something like that. So, you know, we're looking forward, but we got some work to do in between. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. Definitely couldn't do the work without you, for sure.
Wow, it's all of us.
Yes. Hi, Jonna. Did you have a question? I'm sorry, is it Jonna or Jonah?
Yeah,
Jonna,
thank
right?
you.
Yeah.
And this, to be candid, this is an area and a place of learning for me. I've really had to lean on a lot of my colleagues and friends to better understand these rules and all of it. It's just not an area of expertise for me. So I appreciate this conversation. It's been really enlightening for me. I had a question. I just want to elaborate a little bit on a question that was around why certain felonies over all criminal history. Because when I was the conversations I've been in we've been thinking about it in the racial bias in sentencing. And so you might have very dangerous people who don't have felony convictions of that specific nature because of bias when they were sentenced. Because when you look at data, a lot of Black and brown folks get way higher, tougher sentences than white folks. That doesn't mean that some of those white people aren't dangerous and should have a certain felony conviction. So that's kind of the gist of some of the conversations I've been in around what type of criminal background to do the look back on. And I'm just curious if that has come up, if there's other perspectives on that I'm missing, and kind of a little help understanding why, is it, if you're only going to look for certain types of crimes, why not look at all criminal activity, but then only focus on certain types of crimes and let the rest go, versus only looking at certain felonies? I think I'm missing something, and I just want some perspective.
Yeah, so when we get a screening, we see the entire history. So we'll see the misdemeanors and other minor offenses on there. It's just more about what is going to flag this application to then have to be required to go through that individualized review process. And so, like you said, during this public comment period, I've been hearing comments about, well, maybe you should look at all, or maybe at least felony and misdemeanor for these types of offenses, just to get a sense of a pattern or things like that. I think just the original proposal is kind of based on the original language, which is to look for drug-related, violent, or threatening offenses. And so that is the question we're posing out to the community during this time: is, should it be limited to that? Should it include a more thorough review? Should we limit it to felonies, misdemeanors, a combination? Like, what should that look like, and why? And that's, the question we've kind of put out there to the group right now. And part of that is that when I've been looking at the applications, the majority of them are for drug-related or violent offenses. We don't get, as far as what I've seen so far, the applications, the types of criminal convictions I've seen, there's not that much variance. It's something substance abuse related, possession, sometimes, DV or assault, and then theft at times. And so that's the majority of what we're seeing anyway.
To answer your question, Jonna?
Yeah. So that's what we're trying to polish through too, is what should we be looking at? What is meaningful in making a determination about someone and whether or not they'll be a successful tenant.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
One of the other issues is, even though THA looks at it one way, and let's say we can get, we work with them and we look past some things. When they go to a particular apartment unit, they have to go through another background check screening company. The most widely one used is called On-Site.
Mm-hmm.
Now, On-Site really does a disservice because they don't get their information directly from the court. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes, what happens is On-Site will get the case, but they'll get it and they won't know the particulars of what the individual pled to. They're getting third-party information, which is going to, when they send it to the apartment manager, it already creates a problem right there, because what I have to do is they allow an appeal process. So what I have to do is go through case and to see which ones they dropped and which ones you pled guilty to through a plea bargain. So I have to go back and correct the record with each one of my individuals that has a background. This is very common for me. So, and it gets to be, real artist, because we have to go through this process of how, but, the ultimate thing is once that information comes back, the individual is automatically denied. So he or she is already stigmatized at this point because, you know, if you go look at my background, you only see a couple of charges. You won't see the entire plea bargain. But in this instance, you're going to see every charge that was dropped, and it might have only been reduced down to one charge. So when the manager sees this and then we have to go correct that record, it's an automatic denial.
Yeah. And that's, I think, the second time I've heard that about on-site in particular. So that's
Oh,
also
they
good
did
to
it to me.
Yeah.
I had to save all my records, and when I got into this job position over at TCC and I had to start doing this, I was like, wow, this company did this to me, and this was back in 2009, and they're still doing this to a lot of individuals that apply, and they're one of the greatest, most utilized background check companies. So we were thinking about turning them into the state to have them looked at because of these issues.
Yeah, yeah, and that's really helpful for us to know because it lets us know, you know, what we need to do internally to make sure that even if we have a more lenient policy, that we are also dealing with accurate data and information. So I wish we had more reach as far as, you know, what other private landlords do, but at least on our end.
So what I've done is I know that they got to get the background, so I kind of prep the individuals for this. So now I ask them, because a lot of them have a lot of their paperwork still, they know how to get it because they need it all the time. So now I just work with them, and I'm like, do you have any of your case file paperwork or anything? Because we may have to submit that into the on-site company over there. But now I try to gather some of that up if we're going to be having to go through on-site.
And that's good to hear that, you know, well, not that it's been your experience, but that, you know, it's that you at least know through your experience that many housing providers are using on-site. And so part of their recommendation too is to have someone at THA kind of serve as a liaison for anyone who is going through the application process and has to go through the individualized review process, because it, you know, it can be a little overwhelming to know how to advocate for yourself. And so, you know, even just knowing, even if we can't advocate on behalf of folks, at least when they are learning about our process, they can get a sense of how they can do that in the private market as well. And so just hearing that really reinforces how important that is to let people know how to advocate for yourself and know what your rights are and how to work with landlords in the private market so that, you know, if you get a no, you can find a way to get that yes, or at least know then how to approach the next situation.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, there's interesting conversation, but like I said, there's a lot in this.
Yeah. You know, I was thinking, Ava, too. I'm good friends with Alexis Akel, that was actually just hired over at THA, and I know she kind of recruits new landlords, and I wonder if that's also like, maybe I'm going to let her know, like, hey, if you have members like or landlords that are using on-site, maybe try something else. Maybe Larry has a suggestion for someone better.
No, I just met her, and she just I just met her the other day, and she is working with us to help us in this here. This is and I, you know, we asked for one individual like her like a year ago because of this on-site dilemma, because it was kind of taking me away from my job and my duties in a way, you know, to go do this with the individuals. But now we have somebody at THA that can, you know, discuss these issues with the landlord, like you just stated a minute ago. So that is perfect. So we look forward to that relationship, and, you know, and trying to figure out, you know, externally from us, THA and TCC, how can we help the student mitigate some of the other things?
Yeah. Well, awesome. Thank you guys so much. It's past 3, so I want to make sure that we keep it on time for everybody. But this was a great conversation, and really enjoyed this. So we'll try to continue these policy talks and have these engaging conversations. And again, this is recorded, so I'm going to put it up on our website for everybody to reference later on. along with the resources that were in the chat box too. So thank you again, Ava, and thanks for joining us, Larry, and everybody else that's on the call.
Bye, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye, everybody.